The house was filled with chatter, laughter, and the comforting aroma of roasted turkey. Family members gathered in the spacious dining room, their voices blending together like an old familiar song. Sarah could barely hear the buzz, though. She was there, physically present, but emotionally distant. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in, and the distance between her and the rest of the family seemed insurmountable. Sarah sat at the end of the long dining table, her fingers playing with a napkin on her lap. It was a beautiful dinner, the kind her family had every year. Her mother, always the perfect hostess, smiled brightly as she made sure everyone had a drink in hand and a plate full of food. Sarah's sister, Emily, sat across from her, engaging in a lively conversation with their cousin, Sam. Emily's laughter was the loudest in the room, echoing with the kind of confidence Sarah had always admired but never quite understood. Emily had always been the golden child, the one who made everything seem easy. She was successful, a high-powered lawyer with a thriving career and a well-kept home. Her life, from the outside, was perfect. Sarah envied her at times, but more than that, she envied how effortlessly she fit into the family dynamic. Emily was always the center of attention, and no one seemed to mind. They adored her. Next to Emily sat their brother, Alex, a recent college graduate who had just started a promising job in finance. His face still held that youthful glow of someone who was convinced the world was his oyster. He laughed easily, clinking glasses with a few distant relatives. Everyone praised him for his ambition, his drive, and the success he had already achieved at such a young age. And then there was Sarah, sitting at the edge of the table, staring at her plate, pretending to enjoy the conversation around her. She had never quite felt like she belonged at these gatherings. The warmth and affection her family shared for each other always seemed to bypass her. Sarah's life was different. It wasn't bad, she had a job she liked, a modest apartment, and a small group of close friends, but compared to the shining successes of Emily and Alex, it felt insignificant. Her mother, Janet, always seemed to view her as the quiet, reserved one, the one who didn't quite measure up to the rest. Sarah had always tried to live up to their expectations, but it never felt like it was enough. Maybe it was because she never managed to get that perfect job, or maybe because she'd chosen a path that didn't seem to bring the same kind of material success. But regardless, the unspoken message from her family was clear: she was the one who didn't fit. It wasn't long before the moment Sarah had been dreading arrived. Her mother began handing out presents. The atmosphere shifted from casual conversation to excited anticipation. Sarah watched as Emily opened her gift, a beautifully wrapped box that revealed a stunning gold necklace, the kind that made everyone in the room gasp with admiration. Emily's eyes lit up with genuine surprise, and Sarah forced a smile as her sister thanked their mother profusely. But there was a pang in Sarah's chest, something she couldn't shake. It wasn't jealousy, at least, not entirely. It was a deep, aching reminder that she would never receive such a gesture. Her place at the table had already been decided, and gifts like these were for others, not her. Next, their brother Alex received his gift, a sleek, shiny car key. His face broke into a grin, and he stood up to give their mother a bear hug. "This is amazing, Mom. I can't believe you got me a car," he said, the joy in his voice unmistakable. Their father, Frank, stood up beside him, clapping him on the back with pride. "Such a great kid," Frank said, his voice filled with admiration. Everyone in the room applauded. Alex was the golden boy. The crowd loved him, admired him. And once again, Sarah felt the sharp sting of being overlooked. But she remained silent, putting on a brave face. It was only a car, after all. Still, she couldn't help but wonder why she was always the one left out, why no one ever seemed to care about her accomplishments, her feelings. Finally, her mother turned to her, the last person to receive a gift. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Maybe this time, something would be different. Maybe she would finally be seen, not just as the daughter who never quite fit in, but as someone worthy of attention, someone worthy of a real gift. Her mother's smile was warm as she reached for a small, square box wrapped in bright paper. It was so small, nothing like the others had received, but Sarah's hope still flared. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unwrapped it, hoping that somehow, against all odds, this would be her moment. As the paper fell away, she stared at what was inside, a simple set of cheap napkins. Her stomach sank. They were plain, white napkins with a faint floral design, the kind of thing one might find at a discount store. The kind of thing no one would even remember a few days later. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She forced herself to smile, but it felt fake. Hollow. Her mother was watching her expectantly, her eyes filled with anticipation, waiting for Sarah to react. And Sarah? She didn't know how to react. A part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but another part wanted to cry, to scream, to let all the frustration that had been building up for years come pouring out. "Thank you, Mom," she managed to say, her voice barely audible. Her hand shook as she placed the napkins carefully on the table, pretending they were just as meaningful as the gifts Emily and Alex had received. But they weren't. They weren't even close. The room seemed to hold its breath. The chatter around her continued, but it felt distant. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. No one seemed to notice the discomfort, the awkwardness that now filled the air. It was as though everyone else was caught up in their own joy and excitement, their own little world. And Sarah? She was just a shadow in the corner, a forgotten afterthought. The evening wore on, but Sarah found it harder and harder to focus. Her thoughts churned, tangled up in a mess of hurt, resentment, and disbelief. She wasn't a child anymore. She was an adult, and yet she still felt like the one who was never enough. As dessert was served and the conversation shifted to another topic, Sarah sat back in her chair, feeling more alone than ever. She glanced around the table, her family laughing and talking, and for the first time in a long while, she realized something. She had been chasing their approval for so long, but it was never going to come. The gifts had nothing to do with it. It wasn't about material things, it was about something deeper. Something Sarah had yet to understand. But tonight, it had become painfully clear, no matter how hard she tried, she would never fit into the mold her family had created for her. And that hurt more than anything else. As the evening drew to a close, Sarah excused herself early, retreating to her room with her thoughts swirling like a storm inside her. Tomorrow, she knew, things would be different. The napkins, insignificant as they were, had opened something in her. And it was time to confront it. Time to face the truth that had been lurking beneath the surface for far too long. The morning after the family dinner, Sarah woke feeling a weight in her chest. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind over and over, like a loop she couldn't escape. The napkins. The gifts her siblings received. The feeling of being invisible, unimportant. All of it had settled inside her, like a thorn lodged deep within her heart. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The sense of injustice, the aching hurt, it needed to come out. As she dragged herself out of bed and started the usual routine of getting ready for the day, her mind wandered back to the moments she had tried so hard to suppress. She had been raised in a family where success was measured by outward accomplishments, the right job, the right car, the right house. Sarah had never been able to keep up with the expectations. But it wasn't just about material things. It was the emotional distance, the subtle but constant feeling that she didn't belong. That she wasn't enough. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emily, her sister. "Hey, Sarah, what's going on? You left pretty early last night. Everything okay?" Sarah stared at the message for a moment, feeling a mixture of anger and confusion. Emily was always so unaware. She was the one who received the gold necklace. The one who everyone praised. Of course, she wouldn't notice how Sarah had felt, how much it had hurt her to be so completely ignored. Still, Sarah typed a short response, "Yeah, just tired. Thanks for asking." But the more she thought about it, the more the need to confront her family grew. She couldn't keep pretending. She couldn't stay in this cycle of silence and resentment. Today, she would confront them all. The tension she felt as she walked into the kitchen later that morning was palpable. Her parents, Janet and Frank, were sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, discussing their plans for the upcoming holidays. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. It was now or never. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice tentative but firm. "We need to talk." Frank glanced up from his newspaper, raising an eyebrow. "About what, sweetheart?" Sarah hesitated. This was the moment. "About last night." There was a brief pause as her parents exchanged a look. Janet, ever the picture of grace, placed her coffee cup down on the table and gave Sarah a warm smile. "What about last night, honey?" "You know what about last night," Sarah replied, her voice tight. "The gifts. The napkins." Her parents' expressions shifted, though neither seemed particularly surprised. Sarah's mother, with her ever-patient demeanor, spoke first. "Oh, Sarah, sweetheart, don't make such a big deal out of it. We all know you're not really into that kind of thing anyway." The words stung, more than Sarah had expected. It wasn't just the dismissive tone, it was the way her mother tried to downplay her feelings. The way she always tried to convince Sarah that she was being overly sensitive, that she was making problems where there were none. But Sarah wasn't going to let it slide this time. She had spent her entire life feeling overlooked, underappreciated. The napkins were just the last straw. "I don't care about the gifts," she said, her voice rising with emotion. "It's not about the napkins. It's about how you treat me. Like I don't matter. Like I don't belong here." Her father, who had been silent until now, set down his newspaper. His gaze softened, but there was a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "Sarah, that's not true. We love you, you know that." "I don't feel loved," Sarah shot back, her heart racing. "I feel invisible. You give all the attention to Emily and Alex. They're the ones who get the big gifts, the praise. I don't even get noticed, not really. Not for who I am." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Sarah could feel the weight of her words settling between them, like a storm cloud that was impossible to ignore. Her parents exchanged another glance, but this time it wasn't one of casual reassurance. This one was filled with something closer to realization. Her mother's expression softened, and she stood up slowly, walking over to Sarah. She placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that was meant to comfort but somehow felt hollow. "We don't mean to make you feel that way," Janet said quietly. "You know you're just as important to us as Emily and Alex. We're proud of you, Sarah." But Sarah wasn't sure she believed her anymore. She wanted to believe her, of course. She wanted to believe that the love her mother was offering was genuine. But all those years of feeling like a second-class citizen in her own family were hard to forget. The small gestures of love didn't erase the big ones that were missing. The support her siblings received at every turn. The lack of recognition for her efforts, her successes. "I'm tired of feeling like the afterthought," Sarah muttered, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm tired of being told I'm fine when I'm not. You don't even see it, do you?" The words hung heavy in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Her father, Frank, cleared his throat awkwardly, looking more uncomfortable than Sarah had ever seen him. He glanced at Janet, who was still holding onto Sarah's shoulder. "Maybe we've been blind," Frank said, his voice low and thoughtful. "We've always been so focused on Emily and Alex, their achievements. We might have neglected you in the process, Sarah. And for that, I'm sorry." Sarah looked up at him, surprised by his sincerity. She had expected more excuses, more justification. But this was different. It wasn't a quick fix, not by any means, but it was the first time they had acknowledged her feelings. The first time they had admitted their role in her hurt. "I appreciate that," Sarah whispered. "But it's not just about last night. It's about years of this. Years of feeling like I don't belong. Like I'm not enough." Her mother nodded, her expression somber. "We've made mistakes, Sarah. And we'll do better. I promise." There was a long silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came after the storm, when things began to settle. When understanding started to seep in. "I don't expect everything to change overnight," Sarah said, her voice more calm now. "But I need you to see me. To really see me, for who I am, not just as Emily's sister or Alex's sister. But as me." "Sarah." Her parents both nodded. Frank stood and walked over to her, pulling her into a hug. "We see you, Sarah. We do." And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The days following Sarah's confrontation with her parents were a blur. There was a strange, almost surreal quality to everything. Her mother, Janet, was trying harder. She was more present, asking how Sarah's day was, expressing genuine interest in her life. Her father, Frank, seemed more reflective, more thoughtful in his interactions. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Yet, even as the air between them cleared, Sarah found herself feeling uneasy. It was as though something was still unresolved, like a piece of the puzzle was missing. She had wanted to feel validated, to have her worth recognized by her family. But now that they were trying to do better, Sarah realized that there was more to the story, more to what had been weighing on her all these years. That evening, as she sat in her room reflecting on the events that had transpired, her phone buzzed again. It was Emily, her sister. She had been quiet after Sarah's confrontation, unsure of what to say, but now she was reaching out. "Hey, Sarah. Can we talk?" It was a simple message, but it made Sarah's heart race. She had been avoiding Emily, unsure of how to approach her after everything that had happened. But now, there it was. The invitation to bridge the gap, to confront yet another layer of the emotional distance that had defined their relationship for so long. Sarah didn't hesitate. She picked up her phone and typed a quick reply, "Sure. When? How about now?" Emily's message came almost instantly. "I'm at the coffee shop down the street." Sarah stood up, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to ignore the invitation, to keep her distance from Emily. But another part, something deeper, knew that this was the moment to address the elephant in the room. The tension between them had always been there, just beneath the surface. The jealousy. The competition. The feeling that Emily had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while Sarah remained in the shadows, overlooked and overshadowed. Taking a deep breath, Sarah grabbed her jacket and left the house, her mind still racing. She arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes later, spotting Emily sitting in a corner booth, her usual air of confidence surrounding her like a shield. Sarah hesitated for a moment before walking over, trying to steady her nerves. "Hey," Sarah said, sitting down across from her sister. "Hey," Emily replied, offering a small smile. "I didn't expect you to actually show up." Sarah gave a small chuckle, trying to keep the mood light. But inside, she could feel the heaviness of what needed to be said. She wasn't sure where to start, but she knew it couldn't wait any longer. "Look, Emily," Sarah began, her voice hesitant but determined. "I've been holding on to some stuff for a long time. And I need to say it, even if it's uncomfortable." Emily raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Sarah's serious tone. "Okay. What's going on?" Sarah took a deep breath and dove in. "You know, growing up, it always felt like you were the favorite. You always got the praise, the attention. You were the one who could do no wrong, and well, I was just kind of there. You probably didn't notice, but I always felt like I was in your shadow. Like I was never enough." The words spilled out of Sarah's mouth before she could stop them, and she watched as Emily's expression shifted from surprise to something softer, more thoughtful. "Sarah, I didn't know you felt that way," Emily said, her voice low. "I mean, I always knew you were different. You were always so quiet, so independent. But I never realized you felt like you were being overlooked." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Of course, you didn't. You were too busy being the perfect one to notice." The tension between them thickened, but Emily didn't back away. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes searching Sarah's face. "I'm sorry," Emily said quietly. "I had no idea. Honestly, I always thought you didn't need me. You always seemed so strong, so self-sufficient. And I was always the one needing attention, needing validation." Sarah blinked, surprised. She had always seen Emily as the one who had it all together, the one who had never needed to fight for attention. But now, hearing her sister's words, she realized that Emily had always been just as insecure as she was, just in a different way. "I thought you were perfect," Sarah admitted, her voice softer now. "I thought you had it all. And I just wanted to be seen. To be noticed." Emily's eyes softened, and she reached across the table, placing a hand on Sarah's. "I see you now, Sarah. I do. And I'm sorry for the way I made you feel. For all the years of competition, for all the times I took the spotlight without realizing how it affected you. It was never intentional." The words were like a balm to Sarah's bruised heart. She had spent so many years resenting her sister, feeling as though she was always living in her shadow. But now, in this moment, Sarah saw a different side of Emily. The vulnerability. The understanding. The shared pain. "I don't want to keep fighting, Emily," Sarah said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't want to feel like I'm competing with you for Mom and Dad's attention. I want to feel like I'm enough, just as I am." "You are enough, Sarah," Emily said firmly. "You've always been enough. And I've been blind to that." There was a long silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was a silence filled with understanding, with the unspoken acknowledgement that things had been broken, but they were beginning to heal. Slowly, piece by piece. "You know," Sarah said after a moment, a small smile tugging at her lips, "I don't need a gold necklace or a new car. I just need to know that I'm valued for who I am." "You are," Emily replied, squeezing Sarah's hand. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." The conversation ended with an unspoken promise, one to work through the past, to rebuild the relationship that had been strained for so long. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But Sarah felt, for the first time in a long time, that there was hope. As she left the coffee shop, the cool night air felt different, fresher, lighter. She didn't have all the answers yet, and there were still many wounds to heal. But for the first time, Sarah felt like she was finally being seen. Finally being heard. And that was enough. The days that followed Sarah's conversation with Emily were transformative in ways she hadn't expected. The air between her and her sister felt different, lighter, more open. For the first time, there was a sense of mutual understanding and shared vulnerability. But as much as Emily's words had helped Sarah feel seen, the final part of her emotional journey was still missing, the full confrontation with her parents. Sarah knew that the conversation with Emily was just the beginning. The deeper wounds, the ones rooted in years of favoritism, neglect, and miscommunication, lay with her parents. She couldn't move forward without confronting them, without finding closure with the people who had, in their own way, shaped her sense of worth. Her parents, Janet and Frank, had done better in the weeks following the dinner fiasco. There were more moments of closeness, more attempts at dialogue, but something felt unfinished. Sarah knew that their attempts at making it better weren't enough. She needed them to understand, truly understand, what it felt like to have spent years feeling invisible in the family. To feel like her worth was measured only by what she could do for others or what she could offer in return. The tipping point came one evening when Sarah found her mother sitting alone in the living room, staring out the window as if lost in thought. Janet was usually the picture of composure, always maintaining a certain distance, a certain coolness. But tonight, she looked different, worn, vulnerable, almost fragile. Sarah hesitated for a moment before walking into the room. Her mother glanced over at her, a faint smile on her face, but Sarah could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Mom?" Sarah asked, her voice softer than usual. "Can we talk?" Janet nodded and motioned for Sarah to sit beside her. "Of course, sweetheart." The two of them sat in silence for a moment, both uncertain of where to begin. Sarah's heart was racing as she gathered her thoughts. She had been waiting for this moment for so long, waiting for the courage to say what needed to be said. But now that the time had come, words seemed to escape her. Finally, Sarah took a deep breath and spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. About that dinner. And about all the years before that." Janet's face softened, and she shifted in her seat, her expression becoming more serious. "I know, Sarah. I know I've let you down. I didn't realize how much I had hurt you." Sarah's heart clenched at her mother's words, but she pressed on. "It wasn't just that one dinner, Mom. It's been years of feeling like I was always second best. You and Dad. You always seemed so proud of Emily, and I was the one who could never measure up. It wasn't about the gifts or the attention, it was about always feeling like I was invisible. Like I didn't matter." Janet looked at her daughter, a deep sadness in her eyes. "I didn't know, Sarah. I honestly didn't. I was so focused on making sure Emily had everything she needed, making sure she succeeded, that I never saw how much I was neglecting you. I never realized how much you were hurting." Sarah wiped away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. "I just wanted to be enough, Mom. I wanted to feel like I mattered." There was a long pause, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. Sarah could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air, but there was something else there too, an unspoken understanding, a shift that had been waiting to happen for so long. Janet reached out and took Sarah's hand, her grip firm but tender. "You are enough. You've always been enough. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. I'm sorry I made you feel like you didn't matter." The sincerity in her mother's voice was enough to break through the wall that had been between them for years. Sarah's heart felt heavy, but in a way that wasn't just painful, it was also liberating. This was the apology she had been waiting for, the one that acknowledged her pain and validated her feelings. "I don't need you to be perfect, Mom," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I just need to know that you see me. That you care." "I do," Janet said, her voice thick with emotion. "I see you, Sarah. I always have. I was too blind to realize it." For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she could breathe. The years of resentment, the years of trying to prove herself, those burdens were starting to lift. There was still work to be done, still healing to take place, but in this moment, Sarah knew that her relationship with her mother had begun to change. As Sarah left the living room, she felt a sense of peace settling over her. The weight that had been crushing her chest for years was finally starting to lift. But there was still one more person she needed to confront, her father. Frank had always been a man of few words, a man who kept his emotions carefully guarded. But Sarah knew that if she was going to truly heal, she needed to hear it from him. She needed to know that he, too, saw her, not just as the child who could be counted on to take care of things, but as his daughter, someone worthy of love and attention. Later that evening, after dinner, Sarah found her father in his study, sitting at his desk, flipping through a pile of paperwork. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, and for a brief second, she considered turning away. But then she remembered the conversation with her mother. The healing had begun, and she wasn't going to stop now. "Dad?" she called softly. Frank looked up, his brow furrowing in surprise. "What's up, Sarah?" I need to talk to you." Frank set the papers down and stood up, pushing his chair back with a creak. He motioned for her to sit. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Taking a deep breath, Sarah gathered her thoughts. "I need you to understand, Dad. I've spent so many years feeling invisible. Like I didn't matter. I felt like I was always second to Emily. And that hurt." Frank's expression softened, his eyes full of regret. "I didn't know you felt that way. I thought I was being fair. I thought I was doing right by you. I don't need you to be perfect, Dad," Sarah said quietly. "I just need to know that you see me too. That I matter." For a long time, Frank said nothing. But then, slowly, he walked over to Sarah and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You matter, Sarah. You've always mattered. I'm sorry I never said it before." The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. The healing had begun, and with each apology, each understanding, the pieces of her fractured self-esteem were coming back together. The weeks that followed the emotional confrontations with her parents brought Sarah a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't immediate or perfect, but it was real. The apologies from her mother and father, though painful to hear at first, opened doors to deeper healing, and the relationships within the family began to shift in subtle yet meaningful ways. Sarah had always been the person to hold everything in, to suppress her emotions in favor of keeping the peace. But now, she found herself speaking up more, sharing her feelings and her needs in ways she had never done before. It was liberating, terrifying, and empowering all at once. One evening, as Sarah sat on her balcony looking out at the city skyline, she received a call from Emily. It had been a while since they'd talked at length, and the call felt different. Her sister's voice was warmer, softer, less guarded. "Sarah?" Emily said hesitantly. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About how things have been between us. I think I've been blind to a lot of things. I'm sorry for that." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment she had longed for. She could feel the weight of her sister's words, each one laced with sincerity. They hadn't always had the easiest relationship. There had been jealousy, competition, and misunderstandings, all buried beneath the surface, but in this moment, Emily was offering something more. "It's okay, Em," Sarah replied softly. "We've both been carrying things, haven't we?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, then Emily let out a deep sigh. "I don't want to carry it anymore. I've realized that I've been so focused on myself, I didn't even notice how much I was pushing you away. You've always been there for me, Sarah, even when I didn't deserve it. I want to do better. I want us to be closer." Tears pricked at the corners of Sarah's eyes. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected her sister to be so vulnerable, so open. It was the kind of conversation she had always dreamed of having, but never thought possible. "I want that too," Sarah whispered. "I just needed you to see me, Em. To see that I matter too." "I see you now," Emily replied, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm so sorry for all the times I made you feel like you didn't." Sarah smiled through her tears. "I know, Em. I know. And I forgive you." As they hung up the phone, Sarah sat there in the quiet, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. There was still work to be done, trust had to be rebuilt, and the scars from years of neglect wouldn't disappear overnight, but this was a start. It was a step toward the kind of relationship she had always wanted with her sister. But just as Sarah was beginning to feel the weight of everything lifting, an unexpected knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, standing in the hallway was someone she hadn't seen in years, her ex-husband, Ben. "Ben?" Sarah's voice trembled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" Ben's eyes were tired, a look she hadn't seen in him before. He was still the same person, the same man who had walked out of her life without a second thought, but there was something different about him now. A vulnerability in his eyes, a humility that hadn't existed when they were married. I know this is unexpected," he began, taking a step toward her. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. And I wanted to apologize. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't been prepared for this. For years, she had carried the weight of his abandonment, his coldness, the way he had left her without so much as an explanation. She had tried to move on, to let go of the anger, but there had always been a part of her that longed for closure. I'm sorry for the way I treated you, Sarah, Ben continued, his voice steady but filled with regret. For everything. I know I was selfish. I know I hurt you. And I should have done better. I was too focused on my own issues to see what I was doing to you. Sarah didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Ben she remembered, the man who had left her without looking back, who had always been so sure of his own righteousness. This man, standing before her, was someone who was acknowledging his mistakes, who was seeking forgiveness. Why now? She finally asked, her voice soft. Why are you here? Ben sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, Sarah. I don't know why it took me so long to see it. But I've changed. I've had to face myself in ways I never wanted to. And I realized that I owe you this. I owe you the apology you never got from me. Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she stood there, processing his words. This wasn't something she had ever expected, something she thought she'd moved past. But standing there in front of him, she realized that this apology wasn't for him, it was for her. For the woman she had become, for the strength she had found in the midst of pain. I don't know what to say, Sarah whispered, her heart racing. You don't have to say anything, Ben replied gently. I just needed to say it. For you. And for me. Sarah nodded slowly, the emotions flooding her all at once. The past was never going to disappear, but maybe, just maybe, she could finally let it go. She had spent so long holding on to the hurt, holding on to the anger, that she had forgotten how freeing it was to simply forgive. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for saying it. I've carried that weight for so long. Ben gave her a small, sad smile. I'm sorry I made you carry it alone. As he turned to leave, Sarah stood there, feeling the weight of the past finally lifting. She wasn't sure what the future held for her and Ben, or if they would ever be anything more than two people who once shared a life. But for the first time, she felt whole again, free from the bitterness that had consumed her for so long. The healing wasn't over. There would be more to face, more to rebuild, and more to confront. But in that moment, standing alone in her doorway, Sarah realized that she was stronger than she had ever been before. She had found her voice. She had reclaimed her worth. And most importantly, she had forgiven herself. And that, she knew, was the greatest gift of all.